Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Let some folks come through. Hope everybody is having a great Thursday. So let's just give it another minute. But in the meantime, while people are still joining, I will introduce the panel that we have today. So we're really excited to talk about Google's new page experience update. And we really appreciate everybody joining today to listen in. Today, we're going to talk about, Google's quest to provide a better user experience for searchers, algorithm updates, so on and so forth. And while underperforming in these indicators, when it relates to core web vitals and everything else that Google is saying is going to be critical, business critical for any enterprise moving forward, we're going to discuss what could potentially be harming your conversions now and, potential negative business impacts. So today I'm excited to share that I'm joined by a great panel, and I'm going to introduce everybody. But first I'll introduce myself. I'm Lauren Abramson. I'm an account director at Rio SEO, and I will be moderating today. And with us is Dana Lucio, manager of SEO and content at LSM, Nikki Mosher, head of SEO and content for AgentSync, and Danny Owens, local SEO consultant at Pigzilla. So I'm going to pass it off to Nikki, and everybody can introduce themselves and give a little bit more context about who you are.
Awesome, thank you. I'm Nikki Mosher. I am head of SEO at AgentSync. We are a tech startup in the insurance and licensing compliance area. Not the most exciting of verticals, but pretty fun from a content perspective because there's not a lot of content in this, good content in this space. So we're ramping up our content efforts, which is super fun. I come from the agency background. I had been agency side for about 10 years. So I have a broad range of experience as far as local and technical goes with all kinds of clients. So I'm excited to talk about page experience today.
I'm Dana Lucio. I'm from LSM. I'm the manager of SEO and content. LSM is a full service agency based in Nashville. We primarily work with multi-location businesses and franchises. And my background's in SEO, content, digital. I've always worked in agencies, so just kind of running the gamut on all different types of content.
Nice. So I'm Danny Owens. I'm the owner of Pigzilla. I'm basically a local SEO consultant. I've been doing, local SEO work for small clients, larger clients, been focusing more on white label and then been getting into local SEO training. So I'm finding that really enjoyable, but yeah, in a nutshell, that's me.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. We appreciate you being here with us today and sharing your thoughts. So before we get into the conversation, just a couple housekeeping items. Although all of you wonderful participants are on mute, we like to keep this conversational. So please share any questions throughout the webinar. You can provide them through the Q&A button located at the bottom of your Zoom control panel. We know that there are quite a few questions. We have quite a bit of questions that already came in prior. And so we'll do our best to answer them today. If not, absolutely follow up afterwards. You can also follow today's conversation on Twitter and throughout the webinar at Rio_SEO using the hashtag RioWebinar. And then finally, today's webinar is being recorded and there will be a link that will be sent out within the next 24 hours. So look for a follow-up from the Rio marketing team. All right, so to start off today's discussion, it's important to understand what Google deems to be the ideal page experience, mainly to really avoid being penalized. Google does penalize poor user experience by negatively affecting a website's search, SEO results, SERP presence, as we say. So Nikki, I'm gonna throw this first one to you. Can you share insight into what is Google's interpretation of the ideal page experience? And a brief overview of what the page experience is and the user experience role in determining that experience.
Yeah, definitely. I will give it a stab. It's a loaded one. There's a lot kind of in the page experience update from my interpretation. I think just kind of like a high level overview, Google is looking at like 4 to 6 aspects. I think one, like how fast a page loads, 2, how interactive a page is, how stable a page is, how mobile friendly a page is, and then just overall user experience, usability of a page. And they do a pretty good job of outlining everything in their documentation around the page experience update. Obviously, Core Web Vitals is a huge role in the page experience update that everybody's freaking out about. So looking at how fast things load, looking at, and I meant to pull them up in front of me and I totally didn't do that, but looking at all the different aspects of Core Web Vitals, Olga, and I'm not going to try to pronounce her last name because it's a bit long and starts with a Z, but I will drop into the chat a link that she recently shared out on Twitter. She does an amazing job of breaking down the page experience update and in an audit form and actually includes a template that is really amazing for auditing sites for page experience, because that's something I know agency side especially a lot of people are freaking out about. But just thinking about, I think what Google's interpretation of the page experience is that it's just ultimately providing the user with the best experience across as they access the content of the page in regards to speed and interacting with things like form fills and button clicks. We know that Google's ultimately concerned about serving searchers the best and most relevant content for their search. So I think when they find 2 sites that serve really the best answer, that's when they're really going to look at some of the page experience factors to then decide which result they'll actually serve somebody. So I think from like looking at page experience, obviously everybody's freaking out about Core Web Vitals and stuff, but I think it's important to remember to kind of take a step back and also look at like where your competitors are at with some of those metrics, and not necessarily trying to hit like Google's benchmarks, but trying to be better than your competitors for some of those benchmarks is a great place to start, and then continue to kind of improve things as they go. But just keeping that in mind. And kind of one last note before I pass it on to somebody else is also take a look at your traffic and like where your traffic's currently coming from. I know for our site personally, because we're a SaaS product, we get so much more traffic from desktop devices than mobile. So from our perspective, Core Web Vitals is something I'm definitely going to keep on my radar, but not going to worry about so much right now because most of our traffic isn't coming from mobile devices. So I'm going to keep paying attention to optimizing our site for desktop. So before you give yourself a lot of anxiety, definitely make sure you pay attention to where your traffic's coming from before you get too scared.
Yeah, I think that's extremely valuable. And to your point, it's even more important to prioritize the ultimate requirements, right? And what works best for your business, because people are freaking out across the board, across multiple verticals, and there's a lot of changes coming up. So sticking with that theme of the ideal page experience, and the signals that are related to or search related metrics that contribute to an overall good user experience. Danny, can you share what you think is a great page experience signal that businesses should have on their radar?
Yeah, I'll add what Nikki already said. Directly from Google's documentation, the page experience is a set of signals that measures how users perceive the experience of interacting with a web page. So as Nikki mentioned, there's Core Web Vitals, which is a set of metrics to measure the real world user experience for loading performance, interactivity, and visual stability of the page. So definitely Core Web Vitals, duh. That's something the businesses should have on their radar. But also the page experience includes existing search signals, which are mobile friendliness, safe browsing, HTTPS, and then those intrusive interstitial pop-ups. So those are things that most companies probably already have had on their radar and been working on, but they want to continue improving those and not forget about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so throwing it back to you, Nikki, what role do you think optimized local pages play in this overall update and experience?
Great question. I think like with any of the whenever Google's ranking content, obviously they're going to take things from a page by page perspective. So if you're sending a majority of your traffic to a local page, so if you're in your Google My Business listing, you're linking to a local landing page, I would obviously make sure that those pages are optimized first when you're looking at core web vitals and some of the other page experience factors. So I think just like any other page, making sure that those pages are optimized up to par.
Great. So now that we have a better understanding of what an ideal page experience looks like, we're going to defer to all of you for additional tips to help brands improve their opportunity for page experience. So aside from the homepage, and local pages are often overlooked in terms of optimization, which we often see in terms of differentiated content, right? Hyperlocal content. So circling back to page content, Dana, can you share how does content factor into a user's page experience, and is the content going to affect ranking when the update goes into place?
Yeah, for sure. I think that content's always going to affect ranking. Google's main kind of like concern is helping the users find the best match to their queries. And one of the best ways to do that is to create the best kind of content that's just answering the questions for different users, based on what they're searching at and where they are in that customer journey.
Okay, that's great. Danny, what tips do you have for brands looking to optimize and improve pages?
Well, I have quite a few here. I primarily work on WordPress sites, and that's one of the more popular CMSs right now. So I'll go ahead and mention some plugins too. So of course, for the core web vitals, you're concerned about the site speed. So WP Rocket's a great plugin. It allows you to do many site speed improvements. And on top of that, Short Pixel I like because that allows you to compress and resize those images that might be slowing down the site. And anything you can't knock out, those types of things like plugins, then definitely you need to bring a developer in, because some of these improvements, can't be fixed with just a plugin. It depends on how the theme was built and things like that. So I definitely recommend bringing a developer in if that's possible. For budget, I understand if that's not always the case, but and then also you have to be worried about the safe browsing, which is basically, making sure the site's not getting hacked or having malware or deceptive pages or having weird downloads. So one way to prevent that is using a tool like WordFence. Try to lock down the site security as much as possible. And then once again, if you have budget for it, hiring professionals to go in depth in that, not just using a plugin if possible. Of course, you want to make sure the site's mobile friendly, right? Which by now most sites should be, but if not, that's something that needs to be focused on. And then you have the SSL certificate on your site, and that all your links on your site are HTTPS. And that's something that you can get help with through your hosting company, depending on which service you're using. Some of them will provide free SSL certificates and tech support to help you get that kind of configured properly. But that can be a little difficult to manage. And then the last tip I would say is, the pop-ups in those interstitials, you want to make sure to follow guidelines on that. To try to make sure that the page experience is pleasurable for everybody.
Yeah, there's a fine line, especially with the interstitials for promotional use, that we are seeing more frequently, right? And so, Google did say there is a fine balance between it. You're not necessarily going to get penalized for having one or two, as long as it's relevant to the experience. But what you touched upon, and I think this whole conversation is really the foundations of SEO, right? If you've been in SEO for a while, it's a lot of the same things we've recommended to our clients or within our teams to always stay on top of the way people are using technology differently or finding information differently, right? Mobile, to your point, has been at a forefront for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So you did touch upon tools. So Dana, I want to ask you, your thoughts on any additional tools you'd recommend for measuring the performance of your site. We kind of talked about backend items in different ways, but kind of shifting a little bit to a tool conversation. And Nikki, if you want to answer that afterwards as well.
Yeah, for sure. First and foremost, utilizing the reports that Google just gives you. With Search Console, they have their core web vitals report that'll kind of break down different URLs that you can take a look at. And it ranks them kind of the same way that Google's Page Speed Insights tool also does, by good, poor, average. I think that's a good place to start. There are some other tools that we use. Watt Speed is also a great tool that will show you kind of your lighthouse scores as well as some HTML. And then we always use Pingdom Speed Test, not so much for core web vitals, but just to get a good idea of the size of your website and as well as the page load time. So I can drop those tools in the chat as well.
Awesome. And Nikki, before you answer, I'm going to throw you, and then if, Danny and Dana, you want to answer additionally afterwards, just a quick question. So how would Google analyze and score a site if, let's say, 30% of the pages meet the core web vital standards and the rest don't, right? As we think about tools to help measure the performance, right? How is that playing into it as well as we progress with this update?
Good one. I think it goes back to just paying attention to taking things from a page by page basis. Obviously, we know that Google's trying to send people the best result for their specific query. So I think they're really looking at, from the documentation and stuff that I've read, I think they're really looking at things on a page level. So I think being less concerned about how your site performs on average and really just paying attention to like your most important search queries that are driving like the most important conversion. So if you're a local site, that's your location pages probably, or your service pages. So really focusing on those things on a page level, I think is probably the best way to break down and manage things.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything further related to the question or anything about tools for measurement? Okay.
I'll go ahead and hop in there real quick if you don't mind.
Sure.
Like Nikki was saying, on a page level is what you can be concerned about, these metrics. So Local SEO Guide had created a really cool tool, which I wanted to share in the chat. I will do that. It's where you can run the core web vitals reports by template on a site. So that comes in handy where you have a huge site, right? So you can just check maybe the category page templates or your blog post templates, those kinds of things, and see if maybe those certain templates are not performing well. So, and there's also another tool that I just found recently this week. Redico, I believe is how you say the name, but you can check based on keyword. You can type in the query and the location in this tool, and it will check all of the top 10 pages ranking in the SERPs and show the core web vitals so that you can compare yourself to competitors too.
Awesome.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
Screaming Frog. Screaming Frog also lets you integrate with the PageSpeed API and lets you pull in core web vitals, so you can crawl things in bulk via Screaming Frog, and they're getting so savvy with all their integrations that you can export things to Google Sheets and take things from there the way you want to. So if you really want to look at like automating things, definitely check out some of the different integrations you can do with Screaming Frog and being able to get multiple URLs at once.
So quite a bit of tools and opportunities, and it sounds like there's different ways to connect core tools already used for SEO on a day-to-day basis. So that's really awesome. So we're going to shift a little bit, and we're going to just talk about the algorithm, right? And the sense of, each year we know that ranking signals and ranking factors are variable and they shift. We don't always know 100% what they are in each level of detail, but we have a very good understanding. And with this algorithm update on the impact on page rank, we know ranking impacts visibility. And so, especially as it relates to conversion. So Danny, I'm going to throw this to you. How will this update impact other ranking factors in this in 2021 and beyond? And do brands need to worry about their positioning or traffic being affected?
Okay, so this is just my 2 cents, right? I don't know everything about Google, but we don't know how much these page experience factors will affect other ranking factors. So yes, I believe brands need to worry to some degree about their rankings and traffic with this. If your site already has most of these issues under control, maybe you don't have to worry as much. Unless now if all of your competitors, they have poor SEO and they start implementing these page experience changes, that could affect you, people coming up from behind. But if you're behind on these changes, I think there's definitely more of a risk for those types of sites to be negatively impacted, definitely.
All right, Dana, I'm going to throw it to you and add, additionally, do you think that user experience played a role prior to this?
Yeah, of course. I think, user experience has always been a factor. We talked a little bit earlier about mobile friendliness and HTTPS and having secure sites. Google's just trying to improve everyone's experience. And a big, besides all of those things and the whole mobile first kind of initiative, again, content and being able to match, search, best answer user search queries, all of that has already been playing a role. I think now Google's just rolling out more tools and more information just to continue to improve the web experience overall.
Okay. And I think since we have so many questions, I'm going to pose one last question to the three of you before we get into the Q&A portion. Any other advice do you guys want to share regarding this update? Nikki, we can start with you, or Dana, whoever wants to go first.
Go for it, Dana.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to focus on this, but not make it your number one only priority. I would definitely start with just the basics of SEO, making sure that just normal technical initiatives are in place with like 404 errors and schema, and utilizing those things, as well as keeping an eye on some of these. And like Danny said, keeping an eye on competitors and just seeing where you lie right now.
Yeah, I think that's super smart. I think like do some work now, run some crawls, run some scans, and see where you're at, and kind of have that benchmark and that baseline. And I would say if there's things that are easy to fix them, but then keep focusing on the stuff that has been important for a long time, and make these changes as you have resources to do them, if there are changes to be made, and monitor things. Like if you don't find that thing, if you see all of a sudden that something has jumped and your page speed has really gone down, make sure that you address that then. But I think just kind of keep a pulse on things, and on your competitors too.
All right. So now we're going to start we have, I mean, a ton of questions. I think we have like 11 questions. So we'll see what we can kind of get through. The first question is, what will be the biggest factor affecting search results in the upcoming update that wasn't as big of a factor up to this point? So anybody can jump in at any point to answer these.
I think the core web vitals, I think just the fact that Google's calling them out is probably the biggest thing. We've known for a long time that page speed is an important thing, but some of the other elements of core web vitals, so where you're seeing things load, and page stability as far as like elements on a page moving depending on the size of the device and things like that. I think those are some of the more important things to pay attention to, just because Google's, obviously Google, we take some of that with a grain of salt sometimes, but because they are calling those out, I think it's definitely important that we put those on our radar.
Okay. Anybody else want to answer before we move on? Okay. So our next one is, it's related to the fact that we're a franchise system. So what's the recommendation for a website that includes many location-specific, quote unquote, mini websites and microsites, as far as local SEO goes? So the main website has individual location pages for each franchise, but there's kind of a competition there at the end of the day, but also not, in just kind of managing it. So what is the recommendation there?
As far as my thoughts, I think it just being able to produce hyper localized content that's going to be unique to each site, whether it's different promotions or services, or maybe they do community initiatives. Just having that information on there, I think, is really important for users, as well as kind of talking the way that users themselves are searching. So, saying where you're located, neighborhoods, things like that, I think can really hone in on kind of that uniqueness factor without losing the franchise, kind of brand standards that are probably already in place.
Okay. I know I'm just kind of going through the list. It feels like I'm just spewing questions at you guys, but it can be more conversational. I think that there's just, to what Nikki said earlier, people are freaking out, and there's a lot of concern. But again, a lot of this has been something that SEO folks have been doing for quite a while in the day-to-day, and I think it's just gotten larger visibility because, as Nikki also said, Google mentioned it, right? So the next question, when should pages being flagged within Core Web Vitals be a concern? Should everything be seen as, green with the report? What's the balance there?
I can hop in there if you want. So any warnings or, red definitely is concern. That's what Google's trying to tell you, is that something to pay attention to. But you might not be able to get every page on your site in the green, right? Because sites are huge and there's a lot of different things going on with them. So that's where the prioritization comes in. Maybe your top performing pages or pages that convert well, you want to focus on those. Or as I mentioned, if you're testing the Core Web Vitals by template on the site, that could help you prioritize, see which templates are most problematic. But you definitely just need to prioritize for the larger sites. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to move on to multilingual issues. So if you have a multi-language site, what could be seen as potential, how do you handle it with this update? Is it just an hreflang setup and standard procedure there? Or is it something different, you think? We can also skip the question if we want to, and get back to an answer and a follow-up by all means.
Unless Nikki was going to say something.
No, go for it.
Okay, so to me, off the top of my head, it's going to be treated the same as any website. So multilingual, you're still going to run all the pages through Core Web Vital testing, and then also check any of the other page experience factors. So, essentially multilingual site could just be seen as multiple websites. So you want to check all versions. And to me, off the top of my head, I don't see much of a difference in managing that site, but I haven't been doing a lot of international SEO lately, so I could be wrong.
I think that's fair.
So so I think we need to go back to talking about tools, because we're getting quite a few additional questions about that. I think that when we see, and when we have Google tools available, people kind of see it as gospel, right? Or should we consider that as gospel? But there's additional tools that can provide further context and better in-depth context of what to do. So, someone asked about, should Google Lighthouse be our lighthouse? So I know you guys shared quite a bit of tools and different options in the chat, but anything additional from a tool perspective with that as the lens, can you share your thoughts?
Do they mean for Core Web Vitals or anything? Do you know by chance?
I think we could probably use some clarification, but I think it's related to both Core Web Vitals and in general, because I don't know if you guys are seeing this, but I know that Lighthouse has become more and more upfront because of the Core Web Vital change, right? And and people are looking at the additional or tools that have been available, but maybe not at the forefront of broader non-SEO folks. So different teams are looking into it or talking about it. And there have been some updates with it. So I think maybe with both lenses applied to it.
Okay. For Core Web Vitals, basically, maybe there's confusion because there's multiple tools that are measuring the same thing. So in Google Search Console, you will be able to see the Core Web Vitals directly from Google, where they're giving you those colors and a chart. You can go to Lighthouse and check there. The Lighthouse Google tool will show you Core Web Vitals scores as well, and then recommendations. And then the Google PageSpeed Insights tool will also do that. So Google has at least 3 tools that I know of, and then there's third-party tools that people are starting to build, and that's just for the Core Web Vitals. In regards to other user experience stuff, we don't really have, at least the way that I know of really ways to track this information. We do know, I'm sure you guys have probably heard of long clicks. AJ Cohn has some really interesting articles on this topic. And a long click occurs when somebody performs a search, they click on the result, and then they stay on the site for a while. They don't go back immediately to the search results.
Oh, it's like dwell time. or something from,
something like that. So that has been recently, I saw a tweet from Rand Fishkin where he was going through those US Congress Google Docs and found that Google does use user signals like clicks to measure things. So we do know that that's important, but how can you really check that, right? So there's a few metrics like in Google Analytics that can give you hints into how, you know, outside of core web vitals, how your pages are performing. So everybody should be worried about time on site. That would definitely be an indicator. It's not 100%, right? And then your bounce rate is also helpful, but that can be misleading because if somebody goes to your, let's say they land on your homepage and they call you, they click to call, and then they leave, that counts as a bounce technically by default, right? So as long as you've set up your event tracking to count those events as interactive, and then you can do an adjusted bounce rate setting also, then you can start using maybe the bounce rate number to be a little more of an indicator to see how satisfied users are on the site. So Core Web Vitals testing tools, and then I would say digging into your Google Analytics information would be the other way to kind of measure that, and that's another tool.
That's great. Dana, Nikki, anything further to add?
No, I agree with her. I would definitely start with the Google provided tools for Core Web Vitals, and then same thing, jump into analytics, see how people are just engaging and flowing through your site to understand your users better.
Yeah, I would say if you want to get just even a little bit deeper and not necessarily related to Core Web Vitals, but just as far as user experience, obviously using looking at scroll depth tracking in Google Analytics, and then using a third-party tool like Crazy Egg or SmartLook or Lucky Orange or something like that to actually get heat mapping and actually watching user sessions on your site to see how people are interacting. It doesn't give you hard data, but you can get some valuable insights from those tools as well.
Yeah, no, that's I think heat mapping is something that isn't as always discussed as it could be. I think that's critically important, especially from a UX perspective, right? A lot of the teams are already using those types of tools. So with the tool conversation, another question about how do you track competitors, right? Like what are tools that you guys recommend? I think everybody here mentioned competitors and keeping tabs on them and understanding their performance. So what are some tools that can help brands, you know, measure competitor performance against their own?
That's a good question. I think some of the basics that I feel like people are probably already using, like SEMrush or Ahrefs, you can definitely add a number of competitors in those tools and be able to keep a pulse on those, at least where they're at from a ranking perspective. I have a spreadsheet. I've done a couple of talks on competitive analysis from a technical perspective, and just keeping a spreadsheet of your top competitors and some of their high level metrics, and maybe making it part of like your quarterly process to just go through and kind of see where your competitors are at with some high level metrics. It can be another good way to just keep a pulse on what competitors are doing.
Okay. Dana, Danny?
I also like Spy Food just to kind of look for content gaps and opportunities like that.
Great. All right. So I think we'll have a couple more questions because I feel like I've just been throwing them at you, but this has been a great conversation and unearthing a lot of valuable details for people, and just kind of, it's also great to see the different tools and ways people go about desiring the same results, right? But just the process by which we get there. So two more questions. One, saw a few about ADA compliance and the impact of being ADA compliant with this change. And I think in general, whoever wants to start with that.
I can take a stab at that one if you want. So as far as ADA compliance, I don't think in any of the documentation I've read, it's not specifically measured within Core Web Vitals. Accessibility does show up in Google in Lighthouse. So when you run a Lighthouse audit, you do get accessibility metrics. As far as making sure that your site is accessible, if you're on WordPress, there's a lot of really great plugins, Accessibility, and a couple other ones that are escaping me at the moment that will ensure things like fonts and screen size, and making sure that your site is accessible from some of those important areas. But as far as it actually being part of Core Web Vitals, I don't know that ADA compliance is measured in that way.
Yeah, I would agree. I've seen accessibility become more and more at the forefront again. And again, these are like fundamental items that in general, people should be thinking about integrating as opportunities for technology change for that. One other question, and do intrusive interstitials really affect SEO rankings? I feel like that's been posed quite a bit throughout the industry before. Everybody has some sort of opinion on it. So, anybody want to answer?
I mean, I can go. I don't want to dominate, but I have thoughts.
Go
I
for
think
it.
like if you have like pop-ups and things like that are completely blocking how the above the fold content loads and is accessible, that can definitely impact from a negative standpoint from a ranking perspective, especially if Google's not able to access that content. If people are getting frustrated and can't actually access the content, especially on a mobile device, and are just bouncing right back off your page, obviously that's going to impact your conversions. People aren't going to find what they're looking for. They're going to leave your site, and all of those signals, like Danny just mentioned, can get back to Google, and that can definitely impact things. I think the best thing you can do is use tools again like Screaming Frog. Make sure that the boxes are checked so that you can actually see the visual load of a page and what Google's seeing. Google Search Console, looking at the live view of a page and how Google's rendering that page, will also give you a sense for how Google's viewing that, and that can give you an indication if you could be seeing any potential ranking issues from how things are loading. And just look at your pages on a mobile device. I think that's something I know I forget to do all the time. Actually looking at how your site is loading on different devices, and if you're having an issue with it, there's a very good chance other people and Google are having an issue accessing your content.
And can I just add to that, Nikki?
Yeah.
So the interstitials, I've not actually personally experienced somebody being penalized for that. But, if you think about it, who cares if there's a penalty or not? Because we just don't want to irritate the users, right? So a lot of times people want to have something to, like force you to sign up for their email list or something, which I get that. So I guess it would all just come down to when they're, whoever asked the question, whenever you're working on the site, try to experience it yourself and say, pretend you're wanting to go read an article. How frustrating is the experience for you? Is it just one pop-up? Is there a bunch of them? Just kind of go through that. That's what I recommend.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, we're all users ourselves. So the things that, might annoy one of us, like, it's probably annoying other people too.
It's the best focus group that one could possibly get.
Yeah.
Or two. All right. So I think that's all the time that we have for today. This has been a really great conversation. I appreciate everybody's time here. For the participants, if you have any further questions, or if we didn't get a chance to answer your questions that you supplied here, we'll follow up. But if you have additional questions, please send a note to marketing@rioseo.com. Nikki, Dana, Danny, thank you guys for your time today. Really appreciate it. Can you let the audience know how they can reach you if they have any follow-up questions or want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having us. You can find me on Twitter at Knickers85. I'll drop it in the chat in just a second.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter as well. Dana Marie 14. I'll drop it in the chat as well.
Same here. I'll go ahead and share a link to my site, pigzilla.co, and then I'll share my Twitter link because trying to tell you how to spell it would be horrible. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time. I had a pleasure moderating for all of you wonderful ladies today, and I look forward to doing this again.
Us as well. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.